Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 37. I'm Enigmius, and today we're finishing off the prototype for the Thunder Guppy, our Tier 10 hover SMG gun bed thing, whatever you want to call it. Today is, unfortunately, I think, to my liking, a lot more about gun mounts. Not because gun mounts are bad or because the gun mounts are awful, it's because we have a lot of guns, so we have to do a lot of gun mounts, and there are a lot of viewers who like to see every block going down no matter how many times we've put it there before. So we're just going to show the whole thing. Really, the focus of this episode is about everything else, right? We've got all the guns on at some point, and then we've got to fit all the other things that make it a working bot, like hover blades, rudders, thrusters, pilot seat, things like that. But we are going to be doing some enhancements on the gun mount design that we had going for us in the last episode for more kind of 360 degree coverage, and you can see it going in with this mount here specifically, and then we're going to go over here and do it again over here, and basically doing everything that we can to prevent routing damage to the block that the gun is sitting on. It's the easiest way for me to think of it. Instead of trying to think of routing damage away from blah blah blah, it's stop damage from going to this block. That makes it a lot easier to visualize and kind of imagine as we're putting the blocks down. Is this allowing damage to travel directly to the blocks that we want to protect? If yes, change it. If no, good. We've got a winning design on our hands. Sometimes it takes a little while. It's not always going to be the first design that comes to mind. As you'll see, as you've already seen, no doubt, with the amount of changes and tweaks and things that we do as we go along throughout this entire process. And then, of course, as we move back, you can still see we've got the framework here for the remaining 3 guns that we have to do gun mounts for. We have to manage the connection from the gun mount, which is quite a ways above the chassis relative to other things, to the chassis itself in a way that's not too flimsy, that's not too easy to destroy. And if we could manage that, then at least the top portion of the bot will be pretty well defended from the top, as much as we can reasonably hope to with the CPU that we have to work with. One weakness I can already tell you that this bot will have is that it is not going to handle damage from underneath very well, and that's a CPU limitation, not that I'm unable to come up with a design that would work better to protect it. It's just we've invested so much CPU just getting all of these gun mounts and guns into place. By the time we get all the other necessary components, there's no CPU left for further armoring. There's definitely no CPU left for electroplates this time. We have to level up quite a bit before we can do that. So in terms of a prototype, ultimately I'm pretty happy with the way this thing is sitting in the garage now. It's going to cost a fortune to convert all of these white blocks to tier appropriate blocks. We're just going to be using the tier 9 blocks to start, because tier 10 is way too expensive. 12,000 RP each, and we need hundreds of them. That's just not a reasonable price for us to be working with. Even with premium, that's outrageous. It's just completely beyond what a reasonable person would expect. If you ever break it down into how many matches you would have to run with premium, assuming all wins, with, say, average kind of wins, not super strong wins, it's hundreds of matches that you would have to play just so that you could afford to finish a bot like this, which is unfortunate because there's so much talk about leaving things questionable in nature in the game because it promotes creativity, and then the most glaring affront to creativity in the game is the CPU system that says, nope, you can't place that there because arbitrary. You have to level up another 30 times and then everything will work fine. So I don't want to go on too much of a rant about it. I don't like the CPU system. I think it's unnecessary. I think that if there was supposed to be a limitation, you've been playing for 3 years and you've been playing for 3 months, so the 3-year guy, he's finally at the top of the heap, and the 3-month guy, seeing 2 3/4 years, it's just, no, it doesn't work for me. So that's why we're just going to leave it in the garage until it's finished the way we want it to be finished. Now, having said that, a little bit of stalling there. Now you're starting to see the final iteration of the gun mounts going into place, where we've got this section in the front is doing a reasonable job of absorbing a bit of damage before it gets to the block the gun is on. Both sides of the gun, even the interior sides, the sides where it would be really hard to reach because there's so much bot in the way, those are doing a reasonable job of protecting the block that the gun is on. And now this backside is basically doing the same thing. We're not making it easy for the damage to flow directly to those blocks that the gun is on, and we've got a little bit of extra armor in place to prevent from that being the case, where it's just one shot and the gun is gone kind of thing. So in terms of gun mounts, this is probably one of the better, or in, to my estimation, one of the better that I've done. It looks kind of snazzy. It's got a lot more protection than the previous mounts that I've done. And it's pretty easy to build. There's nothing particularly complicated about it. One thing that will be going in place as we get the CPU to do so is tetras in certain strategic locations that'll bulk them out even that much more, so that it's more armor that you have to go through before you can actually get to the gun itself. Realistically speaking, the only way we're going to be losing a lot of guns is if we get focus fired by a number of different bots at the same time, and or eating a lot of plasma kind of falling down on us and going the whole anti-gun umbrella route to popping our guns off. So that's kind of a reasonable accomplishment, you could say, for this build, is not only coming up with the design, but getting it in place 9 times, 9 different elevations, in a way that we can be happy with, that we aren't too worried about things falling apart. Now this back end, as I mentioned previously, one of my Achilles heels with previous bots is that they tend to be armored well from the front and the sides, but not the back. The gun mounts is another example of this, but this is that we're talking about the bot as a whole being vulnerable from the back side, because it's just not a lot of effort has been put into armoring it properly. I know with the Pretty Hate Machine, I've actually increased the armoring in the back a little bit, but I still lose my thrusters a lot. And when I lose my thrusters, it's bad news, because they're in the back end, they're relatively exposed, and they're just a very inviting target relative to anything else that's on the bot. So with this bot, I wanted to keep that in mind. The whole idea is, it's odd, because when I'm building bots that only have like 6 guns, or with the rail bots with only 4 guns, I think of it less. When I can afford to lose the guns less, I think about protecting them from the back less. Now that I've got all these extra guns, I want to keep them all for some reason. I have this covetous kind of streak. I don't want to lose any of them, even though I can afford to lose 3 without losing offensive power. So I want to make sure that I'm not making it really easy for bots that are flanking coming up from behind to take out a bunch of guns and leave me with only 6. I know there's not a lot of logic there. There's not a lot of reason. It works for this bot. Anytime you can come up with an excuse to do things better, like armoring the bot better from behind, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the logic for doing it with this bot and not having it done so well with previous bots is not there. It's just none. So you can see a lot of times it's just about placing blocks, like filling in as much as you can with blocks and creating those barriers without necessarily worrying too much about how it looks. This one is looking a little bit gnarly from the back side. But just thinking in terms of how many blocks can I place between what I need and what I don't care about, so that what I need stays longer, and we end up with this, which is basically that whole gun mount concept is now fit on the back side, and we can finally see what this thing looks like with 9 guns and gun mounts. So gun mounts are done. Hooray! If you've survived this long, congratulations. Now you get to watch me fiddle around with rudders for 20 minutes. No, not 20 minutes, but there was a while of rudder fiddling that passed, because as you can see, there's not a whole lot of room where I can tuck them up into the bot. They basically have to be right along the bottom, and this was, first of all, one of my first clues that the underside of the bot was going to be vulnerable, is trying to find a spot to fit these rudders. They're tier 10 rudders. I could probably get away with lower, but I didn't want to mess around with it. I decided I would just go with the tier 10, and then I don't have to worry about whether or not the ones I put on are strong enough, because if they're not strong enough, too bad. I can't get stronger. And they're freaking enormous. You can see when I try and place them just how much space I need. It won't let me place them anywhere And one of the things that I wasn't counting on is that for all practical intents and purposes, the rudders are treated as rectangles. Now previously it wasn't really a concern because I was either placing them and then building around them, or they were small enough that it didn't matter. In this case, not so much. They want a lot of space, and it's a little bit misleading because of that rectangle. There's a lot of space along the leading edge of the rudder that's sloped that you would think you would be allowed to have blocks in that you can't. So you just kind of have to identify where we were thinking incorrectly and then account for it. And in this case, it looks like the easiest way for us to get this rudder to fit anywhere ever is to just kind of give ourselves a little bit of extra room on the outside perimeter of the chassis, and then there we go. We finally get a rudder into place. These rudders, in case this is one of the first videos you've seen of me doing like a hover vehicle, the rudders that I'm placing are designed to provide stability to the bot so that it doesn't wobble around so much. And you would be amazed if you have a hover, like so many I see medics and SMGs. They're hovers and they're just little things and they're cladded in electroplates, and that's all they've got, and thrusters and guns, and they bop around all over the place. They're extremely difficult to control because they kind of have a mind of their own. If you then take one of those bots and stick a couple of rudders on it so that they're horizontally oriented like the ones I have now, they're flat on their side, but not necessarily facing out like they would be in an airplane, the amount of extra stability you get is very, very noticeable. You don't do the bobbing around anymore. You aren't as susceptible to flipping when you go over terrain and things of that nature. You just basically fly off of short distances, settle down very nicely. There's no other reason that I would take up so much space and so much CPU on a bot for rudders if they weren't offering something substantial, and believe me, they definitely do. So there's no regrets about putting rudders on any hover bot. And like I say, if you've built a hover vehicle before but you haven't tried it, give it a try. You'll be sold instantly. So now we've got the ubiquitous cockpit. We've got the gun mounts. The driver's seat on this bot is already relatively well protected. From the top down, obviously, the protection is not so great. Nothing from the bottom up on this bot is particularly well protected. But at least for the basics, we want to get this driver's seat in place, and then to keep in mind, as we move on to other things, not to crowd the driver's seat with components that would prevent us from armoring it properly down the line, because the issue we're going to encounter with this bot is we're going to run out of CPU before we have a chance to properly armor it. Finally, we've got some hover blades going on. Can't be a hover without hover blades. And I'm basically just kind of sticking them wherever I can find space. Now, with the Pretty Hate machine, we stagger the elevation of the hover blades, and as a result, it sits a little bit low in the back, but it doesn't have the whole instability thing about having too much mass above the hover blades that would cause it to want to flip over. With this bot, you can see I did sort of the same thing. The ones in the back, obviously, are quite high relative to the others, and it's near the top of the chassis. The ones down in the front are close down to the bottom. I can tell you now I ended up changing that. The ones in the back are now on the bottom as well, because first of all, this bot is wide enough. We aren't too worried about it flipping, and also because we're lacking the protection on the underside, I don't plan on playing this bot elevated any more than I absolutely have to. So I'm not too worried about the stability component. We'll do some testing in the practice map once we get everything squared away and we're pretty close to done upgrading the chassis blocks. But I can tell you right now, just from what I've seen with it as it sits in the garage, is the hover blades did better all at the bottom. And so now we basically got everything on the bot that we want, except for thrusters. A pair of tier 10 thrusters, and again, that's all I can afford. I'm out of CPU. We get those guys on, and now it's just a case of how do we tweak things a little bit. We need more CPU actually before we can get that second thruster on. That's what we're doing now, is we're trimming down that bottom row of chassis blocks. Now that we know where the guns are, we don't need it necessarily so much, but we trim it down so that we use just a fewer blocks, and that will be enough for us to be able to mount this second thruster. That's how down to the wire we are at level 68. 67 or 68. It's very, very difficult for me to see as I'm recording the commentary, the little number in the top left corner of the screen. But, you know, we're in the upper 60s, and we're out of CPU. We can't finish the bot unless we trim down on some of the chassis blocks. So it's a pretty easy thing that we can do. If we get to that point towards the end of a build with the armor core method where we need just a little bit of extra CPU, we can always kind of take a look at the chassis and trim things down in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise the strength of the bot, but frees up that extra CPU. And then if it's really important to us later on when we gain the extra levels, we can always come back and, you know, put things back the way they were. In this case, I'm just interested in getting the thrusters on. And you can see that rectangular profile on those rudders. You can't actually see the rudders from here, but you can see the yellow lines indicating the outline of where you can't put blocks. And so that's the profile that we're trying to follow here, while at the same time reducing the number of total blocks involved in this whole thing. Literally, like, less than 10 blocks between us and that second thruster. It's such a damn shame. So we're just about done here. In the next episode, we're going to do some match footage in Pretty Hate Machine. We've got another build, just a gratuitous, fun build that I did following that. And then hopefully by the time that's done, we'll at least have something to look at here with regards to the Thunder Guppy. So if you want to be notified when I add those videos, by all means, subscribe. You can also follow me on the social media. Links to that are in the information section below the video. Please leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.